Hello again all, just going to kick this video off with a quickie update on Miss Alice. This is the breeder for this season. Next season there's going to be a couple of more. But she seems to be building well. She rejected her last few offerings of meals. She rejected her last lock, and she had previously locked 4 times successfully, so hopefully ovulation soon is March. So I guess we're getting to around that time, but we'll see. They're all on their own schedule. Also, apologies for anyone that cares that I'm not uploading often as of yet. Obviously I'm in my first couple of years and I don't have a ton of snakes or a ton of babies at this moment, so there is less to make videos about. And also for most of my videos, I'd really rather be more thoughtful. I don't want to just spit out content for no reason and saturate YouTube. I want to make sure that I have actually something to make a video about, at least most of the time. Sometimes it'll be, maybe something kind of dumb or silly, but I want to put a little more thought and meaning into my videos. Later this year, in fall 2024, I'm going to be producing a lot more clutches and have more pairings than I have in my first 2 years, so I'll have a lot more to make content about and more snakes to show. Also, I will be moving this spring, which means that I will have more space and more finances available to get more racks and enclosures. So that's another problem I'm having, is I'm kind of low on space, so I have to keep it tight. I did successfully sell off all of the available babies from the previous clutch, so that's good. So we have room for this clutch. Hooray. Alrighty, now on to the topic for the video. So the main topic I want to discuss is why to handle your snakes, with some disclaimers and caveats, because this is a very gray area, and I see a lot of people that are either on one side of the spectrum or the other, whereas I lie somewhere in the middle. And to be clear, I am enclosure neutral. This has nothing to do with the type of enclosures you keep. This is simply how and why you interact with your snakes. This is also not to suggest that there is anything wrong with people who do things differently. You are not doing your snake any harm if you do not handle. I actually believe that it's harmful to handle too much. This is just why I personally do myself, and would suggest that you have some level of gentle interaction with your snakes periodically throughout their life. This right here is a beautiful example. When I open my snake's tub, and this is the case for most of them, but especially the young ones I've been able to work with the most, there is no fear, there is no recoil, there is no panic, there is no heavy breathing, because this snake has at least had enough conditioning and interaction with me to know that I am not a threat. Now, this is obviously not a factor in the wild, because animals in the wild do not have to interact with people, they keep to themselves. But when they must interact with people, like you must feed them, you must spot clean their enclosure, you must change their water, they, no matter what, have to occasionally interact with you, right? So why would it not make sense to make that a less mortifying experience? We have all seen many videos from many breeders where, especially in the case of opaque tubs, where snakes don't get regular exposure to light and movement, they are notably taken back or fearful when a tub is opened and they don't know what's going to happen. Because suddenly there's light, suddenly there's movement, suddenly there's this large sort of ape-like beast hanging over them. This snake could not be less fazed by my presence. She doesn't keep her eyes on me. She isn't spending the whole time frozen or recoiled. They instead behave curiously, approaching me, sometimes actually seeking interaction in a way of trying to crawl onto my hand or my arm. These are clearly snakes that don't think that I'm going to harm them. So this snake I acquired slightly older, therefore have not worked with her as much. She was probably kept in your standard breeder rack up until I got her. And very different, very different reaction. She immediately recoiled into herself and hid her head. It takes her a lot longer to start moving around, relax herself, and stop kind of being in this defensive fear position. So my personal preference, this is not how I want my breeders to be, this isn't how I want my offspring to be, this is not how I want to send a snake to a new home, because I just know that the customer will not enjoy them nearly as much if they are just afraid all the time. Even though people should come to expect this when they purchase a snake, people care about how their animals feel. People care about whether or not they're providing a happy home. They care about whether or not their presence stresses their animal out. I think that's perfectly reasonable. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with wanting your animal to be happy or stress-free. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to enjoy interacting with them and to feel like they're okay interacting with you. So when would I suggest not handling? Well, I don't believe that you should handle your ball python every day. I do not believe that you should handle your ball python the day of or the day after feeding, for obvious reasons, and I don't believe you should handle a ball python that is not coping well, especially those that are not eating. I always tell people that when you bring a new ball python home, don't handle it until it is eaten at least a couple of times for you so that you know it feels secure enough in its environment. I actually had a hatchling that was shown in a previous video that was so fearful that it wouldn't even look at prey, it would hide from prey. It thought that its frozen thawed mice were going to do it some level of harm. And it wouldn't even try to attempt to feed on its own. So it had to be assist fed for months. So I decided with that particular baby, maybe I need to change its brain chemistry and the way that it thinks, because it's so darn afraid. It knows nothing but hiding. It won't even drink water. It was so scared. So I decided, after a few months of leaving it alone and doing assist feeding and trying different prey items and everything else that people suggest, I did a couple of gentle handling sessions with the snake instead. I had it sit on the couch with me for maybe like half an hour, showing it that there is a world outside of its little coconut hide and that, you know, I am not going to hurt it. Nothing in this room was going to do it any harm, and I did that a couple of times. And shockingly, I shit you not, the very next time I offered food, it did in fact eat. And then it proceeded to eat for every meal after, and another month or two after that, it was ready to go off to its new home. This was, of course, a special case. I would never suggest that the typical person do this to try to get their nervous snake to eat, but in my case it did work, and I was right. It just needed to stop fearing everything so that it could finally get its mind on other things. I've had conversations with a couple of people about this topic, and there are definitely some kind of more polarizing mindsets, but the argument I've heard is that, you know, these snakes are obviously very primitive and simple-minded, and they are not really capable of what one would say social skills, or changing their behavior or how they feel about people or anything like that. Now, I understand that these animals are very instinct-driven. They are not mammals, they're pythons, not puppies. They will never actually love you back. They will never, quote-unquote, enjoy handling. They will never be social. However, I think that we can reach tolerance, content, comfort. You know, I think that we can at least eliminate or reduce the fear response by doing a little bit of gentle handling. And not even handling necessarily, your hand and your touch doesn't have to be involved. Just any positive interaction. They could also be placed in a playpen or some kind of a safe enclosed space to free roam. If an animal never has the opportunity to interact with something, it may not know how to react when it finally does see it, and it could be a little bit more traumatizing. So early exposure to different stimuli might mean that they're less likely to have a fear response to it. And this is great, again, if you are raising babies that are supposed to go into new homes, and if they're pet homes, they could be going into actual enclosures. I mean, if you're somebody that cares about that, I know that I do, you maybe don't want your customer to be unhappy because all the snake ever does is hide because it's so overwhelmed by the new environment. Kind of arguments that I hear are obviously that these are very, you know, simple primitive animals. They don't actually care about what's in their environment. They don't actually change their behavior based on stimuli or exposures or their interactions with you. I have to disagree. I have not only been keeping ball pythons for now 16 years, and I've worked in several aspects of the exotics industry, including working with them professionally and personally. I have several now. I've, you know, produced a clutch. I'm working on my second, and all of the babies from my first clutch had completely different personalities. Yet after a few months of working with them, they all kind of got much more to the same level. And it's not just because I know how to handle them in a way that is not traumatizing, because that didn't make a difference at first with the ones that were not well adjusted. I had one that was very sort of defensive/aggressive, depending on how you look at it, and one that was incredibly fearful, and nothing that I did in that first month really changed their behavior. However, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 months later, they were completely different animals. So yes, for sure, without a shadow of a doubt, the gentle interaction, the occasional exposure to stimuli, and the work that I did with them did in fact change their demeanor and the way that they saw interaction with people, the way that they saw stimuli. I know what these animals are. I know that they're pythons. I know that they are more limited than mammals in their capabilities. But to actually suggest that they cannot learn anything, like anything, they can't even learn to not fear their caretakers, just seems so extreme and absurd, and just like grasping at straws, like desperately trying to hold on to the idea that, you know, we should absolutely never interact with them, we should never touch them. I'm very neutral on a lot of things, but I do hear a lot of extremist opinions that I don't think serve anybody, and they're only going to hold us back from actually learning about this incredible species, and it doesn't help anybody. Now, if this is not something that you personally care about, you know, if you're a large-scale breeder, I understand you don't have the space or time or resources or money to do all of these things. I get that. You have to worry about your business and efficiency and do what works for you and what makes sense for the number of animals that you have. Okay, so I talked a bit about how this could benefit hatchlings and new arrivals and snakes that are supposed to go off to a new home, but what about your breeders? What about your large breeder females? Well, obviously, if it's done in moderation, gently, non-invasively, and not at inopportune times, I think it can have a similar effect. I've heard a lot of breeders talk about, oh, they moved their snakes to a different spot in the rack, there was a sudden change in temperatures, or they had to move, and their females reabsorbed. Well, that kind of makes sense when your female is kept in a, you know, dark tub, quiet, no light, no movement, and its world is so consistent. It's so consistent all of the time, and any small change is much more dramatic than, say, a snake who regularly moves from place to place or has some level of enrichment or interaction. I mean, if they're exposed to that all the time, and they know there's nothing to fear, why would they reabsorb? I was able to kind of prove out this concept with my first female, as obviously I had her for years and years, and I interacted with her a lot, including the entire time that she was building follicles. I handled her very regularly. She was put in the playpen very regularly. I messed with her a lot. I messed with her enclosure, more so as an experiment to see if I could prevent her from laying that clutch by interrupting her day-to-day activities too much, within reason, obviously. She had every opportunity to be uncomfortable and insecure enough to reabsorb, and she did not. And the same with this female. This female's only about 3, so she's a lot younger, and I've done less work with her than the other, but same thing. I don't stop handling her or checking her out or moving things around in her enclosure. She goes in the playpen. When she's, you know, coming up to the door and glass surfing, I let her out. And so far, she hasn't changed her building-like behavior. And we'll see, of course, if she goes on to lay, but to me, like, having bulletproof females and bulletproof babies is just, I don't see why you wouldn't want that as a breeder, as a pet keeper, just, or somebody that has to interact with these animals on a daily basis. Shouldn't it be more positive? Shouldn't it not affect them so dramatically? Wouldn't you prefer that it did not stress them out quite so much? You can influence that. If you want to, you can influence that. And there might be a mutual benefit to doing that. So, just my thoughts on this topic. I'm not an expert. What I say is not law. We are all learning, and there has been very little science done. I just feel like there should be more. I feel like there should be more thought. There should be more experimentation. There should be more people trying new things. So you don't have to listen to me. You don't have to change a thing. I don't think you're in the wrong if you keep your snakes any particular way, or if you are not interacting with them, especially if you do not care. But I care. So I figured I would share some of this info and experience with you if it matters. So thanks for viewing. Hopefully this wasn't too long-winded, and I'll see you in the next one.